Well, we're here with episode 17 of the Missing Link in Your Healing podcast. And we're doing another episode on anger. It's our second episode on anger. So if you didn't listen to episode 16, please go back. It's a very big topic. It's the most bypassed feeling on the planet. And it's undoubtedly a major factor in creating illness or keeping us healthy. So, Loretta, we're going to speak a bit more to that in this episode. So, today we're just going to look at a bit more of an overview of anger and why it's important to feel it. We're going to look at a set of steps to process anger, and we're going to break those steps up over a number of episodes. We're going to look at some more into the organ energetics of anger and also how to regulate our nervous system so that we can create a safe container for anger. So hang in and listen to the whole episode. I know some people don't listen all the way through, but I think everything in this episode is going to be a little nugget of gold, even if I say so myself. Okay, so there is no doubt, thankfully, that globally there's increasing awareness that in order to heal, we have to be able to feel. But feeling means being able to sit with uncomfortable feelings, with sometimes big discomfort, and also to how those feelings are playing out in our body. We need to know that it's necessary to feel the things we've been afraid to feel or possibly ashamed to feel. And because of this, we've bypassed them or suppressed them. It's absolutely essential and important to feel and appropriately process anger. And as we said last week, it's not a comfortable emotion for most human beings. Anger, why is it important? Just to reiterate, anger arises to tell us that our limits are being overstepped and our needs are not being met. So anger is important and it's appropriate, but it's about how we recognize it and what we do with it in a safe way so that we can use it to heal physically, mentally, and spiritually, rather than it being something to help make us sick. Oh, that was really good English. Anger is often a secondary emotion that's underpinned by fear or loss or sadness or abandonment. It can be perceived or real, and it's often an unconscious trigger from past trauma. So that's why this is a deep and wide topic, and that's why we're going to break it up. Anger has become exceptionally stigmatized, unfortunately. And as I said earlier, it's probably the most unrecognized or the most bypassed feeling. It's a vulnerable, very deep, and uncomfortable emotion. It makes us feel like we will lose control, and we often tend to confuse harmful anger with healthy anger. If we are not used to expressing it because we've been shamed or guilted in the past, then we may not even be aware that it's playing out in our lives and our bodies. We mostly don't know it's there because we're only aware of the tip of the iceberg. We've spoken about that before in earlier episodes. The rest is submerged in our unconscious, and Loretta's going to speak a bit more to this just now. And if this is the case, then of course we don't know how to deal with it. Anger, therefore, can be there for years. It could have been there already from childhood, and we don't even know it's coming up from the past, the triggers. So instead of feeling and expressing our anger, what we do, most of us have done or are doing, is to cover it up. Why? Because being out of control does not feel okay for us, and we've been conditioned that it's not okay. So a habit that mostly started in childhood is that we internalize anger, because if we externalize it, we're going to get into trouble or we're going to get abandoned. Or the other thing we do is we take our anger and we blame something or somebody outside of ourselves. Okay, if you start looking at yourself with self-awareness, you'll see you probably doing that. So it's important to be more attentive to anger and to move it out of your body rather than just falling back into evolutionary driven reactive patterns or suppressions. Listen to that twice. If you know how, it is possible to move it out of your body. And this is what we are going to take you through. But it's not enough to listen to a podcast and to get insight. It requires doing the work. So we're going to take you through how to do this work. And then the knowledge alone is not going to be enough, but it does start with self-awareness, with witnessing yourself. And then it will lead to us making embodied choices to heal it intentionally and not to reach for the normal numbing and soothing addictions, whether they be smoking, eating, drugs, porn, overeating, over-exercising. We all have our own soothing methods. But rather than reaching for what will soothe us, it's about creating a safe space, a container to feel it and safely deal with it. How to be angry. This is what we're going to cover in this episode and in one or two more. So the very first thing, there's two things to know, and those are the only two things we're going to really look at today. It's important to release the energy and emotion of anger in your body. So that starts with cultivating awareness of anger in the body. That has to be the absolute starting point. So Loretta, maybe I can hand over to you at this point.
Sure. So because anger is such an, for many of us, unacceptable, almost said hormone, emotion, such an unacceptable emotion, or an emotion that it's not safe for us to express and therefore not even safe for us to feel. And this is particularly strong in women, I found. And if you look at the statistics, women are something like 5 times more likely to be diagnosed with an autoimmune disease, for example, than a man. Now, this isn't because women have flimsy genetics. I do believe that it's because women tend to have more of these restrictions of, in order to be ladylike, you're not allowed to, not allowed to lose it. You got to keep it together. Women are like sugar and spice and all things nice. Okay. And then what we do as a rebellion to that, we can become like all things fiery and feisty, which means we now think that we're actually, we're because we're not like just being our anger in a way that might actually also not be appropriate. We're just as far away from the mean as what we were, whether we're suppressing it and being super sweet, or whether expressing it overly, I'm going to say reactively. Okay. So it's important to know that. And because it's not safe, if we've grown up with an idea that it's not safe, just know this: your ego or your cage, your egoic cage, is going to have a lot of resistance to you actually taking the action. And Jeanette just said, you can't just listen to a podcast. You can have insight. You can go, oh, that sounds like a great idea. And then you're going to find 1,025,000 excuses why you actually can't do the processes that we're going to tell you. So, if I say to you, well, one of the things that you can do is you can like beat the living crap out of a pillow while screaming really loudly, you'll be going like, well, Loretta, that sounds amazing. I'd love to do that. But, I live in an apartment block and I couldn't possibly do that because what would my partner, my neighbor, my children think? So just know that even when something makes perfect sense to you and it really resonates, you're going to have resistance to actually taking the step. And I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but Dr. Andrew Huberman, he's coined a phrase. It's called limbic resistance. He said, whenever we've got to do something that's going to be hard, our limbic system, which is the part that governs as part of our primitive brain, is resistant to it. And so getting up early in the morning and putting on your running shoes and going for a run or going for a walk, people who don't exercise think that people who do that regularly, they find it really easy. Well, they don't. But the difference between the person who gets up in the morning and does the exercise and the person who doesn't, and I'm just using exercise as an example here, is that the person who gets up in the morning overcomes their limbic friction. And the person who lies in bed and turns over and goes back to sleep doesn't overcome their limbic friction. And in actual fact, you can choose to overcome your limbic friction. Until you choose that, it's not going to be, you're not going to do it. Okay. I think that that's really important to actually know. So just because something makes sense and it really resonates, and there's a part of you that's like, yeah, I just want to go out and do it. If you wait long enough, you're going to find 1,000 reasons why you can't do it. And they're all going to be perfectly valid and they're going to be super rational. So just remember, your ego's job is to keep you safe. And if expressing your anger or feeling your anger or acknowledging your anger or locating it in your body is deemed as unsafe by your ego, which it mostly is, you're going to have resistance to doing the processes. So just know that and see that with compassion. Okay. And remind yourself, it's just limbic friction. I started cold plunging in the winter, right? So I'm getting into my swimming pool. I hate the cold. Just want to tell you, I hate the cold. Okay. But, and I've done like walking on coals and all sorts of other extreme shit, but never the cold. Right. And so I went to a festival in February and I actually did an ice bath. And I was like, you know what, if I can do ice, I'm sure I can do my swimming pool in winter. So and you know, I'd get up in the mornings, you know, like you're nice and warm and toasty and it's warm in your house. And now you're going to walk outside across the lawn that's got dew on it. It's wet, it's cold, and get into the swimming pool. I just reminded myself every morning, this is limbic friction, Loretta. It's just limbic friction. And I chose to overcome the limbic friction. It's not discipline. This is not about discipline or being strong. It's about just reminding yourself, what is this really? You know what? It's limbic friction. We've all got it. I can choose to actually overcome it today or choose not to. And many days I chose not to get in the water. And some days I chose to. So remember, there's no wrong or right. Okay. So I just want to recap a little bit about what happens to us energetically when we're angry. And I did say this in the last episode. Anger and frustration and resentment and irritability are associated with the liver and gallbladder energetically. And your liver is the organ that's associated with your beliefs and your trusts. What do you trust in? So if you have a foundational limiting belief that you are worthless, other people's needs matter more than yours, and that the world is essentially an unsafe place, then you are going to do whatever it takes for you to create that sense of safety around you. And if your coping strategy has been to be kind or to be nice or to never say no or never upset anyone, then that's what you're going to do regardless of whether something triggers your anger or not. And that's very often when you don't actually even recognize that it is anger, right? You don't even recognize that you are angry because this is just how you are. One thing, I don't know if I mentioned it, and I may have, but I'm just going to say it again. Your liver is the organ of hypersensitivity in the body. So when you've become hypersensitive to chemicals, geopathic stress, food, alcohol, preservatives, additives, whatever, right? Or whether you become hypersensitive emotionally, easily triggered, take things very personally, overreact maybe when someone does or says something, particularly hard on yourself. That hypersensitivity is an indicator that there is an imbalance happening in that liver gallbladder organ energy. Now, that doesn't mean that you have a liver disease. If you go and have your liver functions tested, they'll probably come back normal, right? It just means energetically that organ is struggling. So the more we support our physical liver health, well, it's not going to stop us from being angry. It's also not going to stop us from reacting. It's also not going to suddenly uncover all our unconscious beliefs. But the body is a unit. The body-mind is a unit, right? So when you improve one area, it helps you access the other areas more effectively. Just and one other thing about how this affects your immune system, because we spoke about that too, so anger compromises your immunity. All right, but how does it do that? Because very often when I have a need that's not being met and I'm triggered and it makes me angry, and whether I express that anger or don't express that anger, if I express it and I explode and I lose my marbles. At Antoinette, for example, we were talking earlier about how I get irritated when she changes the goalpost, but when I change the goalpost, I'm fine with that. And the truth is, it's because when she changes the goalpost, I feel out of control. I need to control myself, others in the world is my primary limiting belief. It's the strongest one I have. So when someone else does something that surprises me, I get angry. When I choose to change it, well, I'm in control of that. So that doesn't really bother me, all right? Which is exactly why I can be so blind to the truth of how often I actually do it, all right? So when you suppressing it, whether you're exploding it or whether you're not acknowledging it at suppressing it, You're saying to your subconscious, I am angry very often at myself. I'm angry at the other person for triggering me. So I'm going to use my example. So let's just say Antoinette changes her mind, lastminute.com. Okay. And I go, now look at her now, massive eye roll. She's changed the goalpost. Okay. I mean, of course, Antoinette never does that with me because I never do anything to trigger her because, I am perfect. Okay. That's a joke. So let's just assume she does something and I get triggered. All right. And now I lose my temper and I'm really mean to her. And then afterwards, I feel bad. Now I feel guilty. So first of all, I'm angry at myself for having been triggered because here I am. I'm supposed to be Loretta, who's Zen, who's teaching other people how to do this. So I need to be perfect, right? So because I've now not got it right, another one of my limiting beliefs, I'm not good enough. I haven't got an A at anger management and being Zen. And I was out of control when I lost my temper. I'm not going to internalize that anger. And so what I'm saying to my subconscious is I should be punished. And what my immune system gets is she should be punished. And when you do that enough over time, your immune system gets confused. And that's when your immune system starts recognizing your own body tissue as not normal, as foreign, and starts attacking. You literally attack yourself. So what happens emotionally and mentally is reflected in your physical body. When you are too nice, so let's assume that poor Antoinette, I'm making her sound awful. She's not. But let's assume that Antoinette is constantly pushing my buttons and I'm constantly Zen, okay? I promise you that this doesn't happen. But let's just assume that that's the case. And I'm just always nice and I always make it okay. And I just take it and I never actually voice my displeasure. Then what my immune system says is like, well, are we not supposed to be like attacking stuff that's foreign? Are we not supposed to be getting rid of foreign stuff here? Okay. And I'm going, no, nothing is foreign. Everything's okay. Everything's allowable. Now what happens is I have abnormal cells that are developed and my immune system goes, everything's okay. We allow everything. Nothing doesn't serve us. And then my 2 abnormal cells multiply into 4 abnormal cells, multiply into 27 abnormal cells, well, it's always an even number, multiply into a tumor with its own blood supply. And then I go, oh, no, now I have a tumor. So that is in a very physically real way in which suppressing it or overexpressing it affects our immune system directly and leads to conditions such as cancer and autoimmune disease. So it's important that we know that. So, okay, please. If you have had issues suppressing your anger for the last 50 years, I don't want you to think, oh my God, tomorrow morning I'm going to wake up with a tumor. You absolutely are not, right? Because you've got different limiting beliefs, you've got different genetics, you've got different trauma, you've got different triggers. It's just an illustration because actually cancer and autoimmune disease are so common. So, especially autoimmune disease now. When I was at university, I think I've said this in another podcast, and it's not a million years ago that I was at university, just saying, 30 years ago, when I was at university, diseases like SLE, multiple sclerosis, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, even Parkinson's, and I mean Alzheimer's for sure. Those were like hairy canaries. When they used to call them hairy canaries. This is what you need to know. You need to be able to diagnose this, and you need to be able to understand the test results of this. But the chances of you actually seeing this appreciably in your career are fairly slim. Yeah, 30 years ago when I was a student. And now every second person has an autoimmune disease. So it is important. And also, it goes back to, we live in this era of this sort of toxic positivity. I think it's about time for an episode on that, Antoinette, where, we've always got to be preppy and we've always got to be upbeat and we've always got to be okay and we've got to be so woke and we can't have an opinion and we can't take a stance. And, we've got to make sure that no one gets offended. Seriously, what is wrong with being offended? What is wrong with being offended? That's another way in which culturally, actually, I've just thought about it. Culturally, it's not acceptable for us to be offended. What is offended? Offended is angry, guys. I'm offended that you may think, I don't know, differently to me. It doesn't mean that I want to harm you or hurt you. But you know what? I can be offended. And ironically, until I can own that this offends me and it makes me angry and I allow myself to feel it and process it, I can't get to a place where I could appreciate your point of view and that you may actually have a valid point of view. So this stuff is important. I mean, we can bang on about this all day, but this stuff is really, really important. So I don't know if you want to talk about the importance of regulating our nervous systems, Antoinette.
No, I think you can. I just want to add one thing to what you just said. A conflict is actually really, really healthy. You learn that in a good business course. You learn it and it's about what you do with it and how you negotiate it. And we are so conflict avoidant. And if we don't express when we're pissed off, or we feel like our needs aren't being met, or what happens is we become passive aggressive, like I used to be. So I suppressed everything. But boy, when it came out, I mentioned this in the last episode, it was ugly. Really, really ugly. And there wasn't a lot. So not only did it turn in on myself, I was so angry towards myself always. So that ended up in autoimmune and cancer. But I also didn't express even my dissatisfaction. I couldn't even say to people, I'm sorry, that's not okay for me. And then I just used to be seething. And the next thing I'm going off pop. And it's ugly. And that's when you feel really ashamed and guilty and embarrassed. So I was saying to Loretta before we recorded is, in healthy relationships, you're in a healthy relationship, business, romantic, friends, if you can lose it, or you can't, because we're all human and we're all going to go off pop, especially when we start learning to process our anger. When we haven't, we're going to start pendulum swinging to maybe over expressing it and not very nicely. So I've got 3 sets of friends who I went off pop after cancer, because I was starting to learn to process my emotions, but I was still suppressing anger, and I went off pop so badly. It was so ugly. And I'll never forget the one we were in Greece, actually, so I couldn't even escape. I couldn't go home. We were all in Greece together. And when I got back to Joburg to my mother, I was like, well, that's it. This is tickets. I've lost 3 friends, a husband and wife and another friend, and they were my closest. And I'm like, well, that's it. It's over now. And then I started hating myself. Do you know that the couple arrived in my driveway one day, just arrived? I came out and I said, oh, I'm so embarrassed. And he came up to me and he hugged me and he said, we love you, Antoinette. Oh. And I just started crying, because I was like, you still love me? So, I mean, that's happened to me at least 3 times when I've been seriously out of line. And people, then they did say, look, it wasn't okay what you did, and we need to discuss this, but we love you. So then we all grow from that, because then I can tell them, why did I get triggered? We don't get triggered for nothing either. What 100%. Did they do? How did I react? Was there too much booze involved, etc., etc.? And then we work out a way that's better, and we all get better for it, actually. So yeah, if the thing is, a lot of people can't do that conflict, because they can't do it. So Loretta, one of the gifts, I think, of us actually working together, because there isn't
you constantly triggering me and me never triggering you, obviously, right?
No, you do trigger me, but I don't take.
I'm trying to be funny.
I don't take you as a. I don't. You don't bother me the way you think you do. I think, because you do sometimes go pop, but it doesn't bother me, because you must also know, when you're working with another person who's an adult, and look, I've still got a long way to go, but I'm relatively emotionally intelligent. When you're in a relationship with another adult, in any kind of relationship, you must know they have they must come back to you and say, I'm sorry, that wasn't okay for me, if they want to. So we must remember, Louise taught me that, actually, Louise Liemenberg, that we're all adults. And if I'm out of line, if Loretta's out of line, she often comes back to me and says, oh, and I'm like, it's okay. It's fine, because if I need to come back to you and say that's not okay for me, I know with Loretta I can do that. Loretta and I know we can navigate any conflict, because we have the same common vision. We can communicate, and it might get a bit hairy, but that's healthy. For me now, Loretta, so I'm going off a bit, but maybe this personal sharing is important. When I'm in relationship now with someone who lets rip, or is completely honest, sometimes in the wrong way, I'm like, oh, thank goodness, I can have a relationship with this person, because there's none of this like hidden, like, I'm nicey, and everything's
Mm.
fine. And the next thing, all this resentment pops like a volcano. Anyway, that was a long
That's a good
share.
point. That is a good point. That's a good point you make. Absolutely. And just for clarity, in case none of you understood, in case anyone else misunderstood, I was being extremely facetious when I intimated that I don't ever trigger Antoinette because I'm perfect. When my daughter was little, we were talking, I was telling her, I told her about, how kids just absorb this stuff, right? And so we were talking about the mirror, as in like when someone really irritates you, you got to ask yourself, what are they mirroring to you? What is it about them? What are they mirroring to you? It's like me, if Antoinette changes the goalpost. I mean, like, so where do I change the goalpost? And the first answer is, well, I don't. Well, actually, when you think about it, you're going, oh yes, I actually do that. Okay, and this is not so that the other person gets let off the hook. It's so that you don't have that explosive reaction towards them. And she was telling me about something at school or someone, I can't remember. And I said to her, well, have you thought about the mirror? And she looked at me and she said to me, Mom, that mirror stuff applies to everyone except me. So there you have it. Okay. So an important thing to bear in mind. Sorry, are you muted, Antoinette? Did you want to say something?
Interrupted you. Carry on.
Okay. An important thing to bear in mind is that you can only have an awareness of this emotion, and you can only locate it in your body and work with it if you know you've got it. And this is where it's so important that our nervous system be well regulated. So it's a very topical, in nervous system dysregulation and dorsovagal stimulation and It's like the new thing on the block. It's not new. It's been around for millions of years, and we all know this. It's actually just common sense. The more bandwidth you have, the less likely you are to be triggered. So when everything's going relatively well in my life, it's going relatively well in my business, small things irritate me less, right? But when I'm feeling really stretched and I'm feeling overwhelmed and I'm feeling really anxious, small things trigger me more easily. And it's really important. And this is a note to myself, all right? Because I've always thought, oh, well, I'm quite robust. I've never really thought about I need to regulate my nervous system. But the truth is, I just am a highly functional person. I can function as in I can do shit in the world. I don't mean I'm a good person to be with. I just mean functional. Like I can get things done even when my nervous system is dysregulated. But you know what? I'm not happy. I'm not enjoying it. I'm not aligned. I'm just being busy. There's a difference between busy and sort of inspired action. Okay. So the more we regulate our nervous system, the more we get that sympathetic, the accelerator, fight or flight, and the parasympathetic, the brake of the car, imagine it's a car, which is about rest and digest and restore. The more we get those two parts of our autonomic nervous system to work in harmony and be regulated, even if it's only for short periods of time in the day, the more likely we are to have the awareness of what's actually going on. The truth is, the more regulated your nervous system is, the more you are receptive to insights from your intuition. That's what I've discovered for myself, 100%. So, we all want our intuition. We all want our wise inner guidance or our pilot light or, our inner pilot or our whatever. We want to get messages from God. It doesn't matter what language you use. It's very difficult to hear the quiet voice on the inside when your nervous system is going, okay, because you can't hear the quiet voice on the inside. So it's really important that we build into our lives and into our days. And I can just hear your limbic friction going, yes, but you don't understand how busy my life is. Yes, I also understand that if you've got social media, you spend at least an hour or 2 hours a day doing shit on your phone, like everybody does. Okay, it used to be TV and now it's the phones, right? So it's important that we build some form of nervous system regulation into our day. Now, you don't have to do it all. If we give you 10 tools, it doesn't mean you have to do 10. You just do the one you want. If you never want a cold plunge, because cold exposure is one of them, you know what? Don't cold plunge. Do something else. Look at Antoinette's face. Do something else, okay? If you don't want to do static back, which is one of the exercises that, in fact, I think it was the episode just before anger that Antoinette did. It was a beautiful, if you haven't listened to it, please go and listen to it. I'm telling you that exercises, it's so cool. You get to lie down, do nothing, and close your eyes for 20 minutes. And it's like super comfortable. I mean, and you're working on yourself. I think it's like a win All right. That is like a winner. All right. And it does really help to regulate your nervous system. So the more stable your nervous system is, because you've actually consciously chosen to stabilize it, the more likely you are to be able to feel these emotions in your body. It's a choice. Every time, if I say I'm going to choose to regulate my nervous system, when you do a process, whether it's a static back or whether it's a Jinshin Jitsu big hug, all the ones we've mentioned, feeling your feelings, doesn't matter, whichever one it is. Besides the benefit of the process itself, the benefit that is almost like a silent benefit, which I think is almost a bigger benefit, is the message you're giving to your subconscious is, I choose to regulate my nervous system and I'm taking action in the direction of doing that. And your subconscious goes, oh, nervous system regulation, that's what we're about. And the more chance you're going to find to do the regulation. So when you take the action, you're creating a new neural pathway in your brain that's going to help you take the action. That's also why the more you take an action repeatedly, the less limbic friction there is. Right? If you only do it once every 10 years, it's not going to work. If you do a Jinshin Jitsu big hug once and you go, well, that didn't calm me down. Well, I'm not surprised that didn't calm you down, because you got like one tiny little brain strand that is like calming down and 4 million going, I'm freaking out. Okay, well, you need to build a few more, right? So really, really, really important that we regulate our nervous system first. So we've spoken about many tools that you can use to regulate your nervous system, all right? And we've had them in various episodes. We've actually got them all together in our Fear Masterclass that we did last week. And for those of you who didn't know, the live version was disastrous because I kept on dropping off the Wi-Fi, and Antoinette and I recorded a brilliant version on Friday. So we have the recording, we have the slide deck, we have the manual, we have some guided exercises in there. And in that, it was about fear, but the tools work for fear, they work for anger, they work for sadness, they work for whatever. And a lot of those tools were specifically designed to help you regulate your nervous system. And they're all in there. And you can buy that package from us. Here's a little shameless plug. You can buy that package from us because we've got it all together. So we'll put a link in the show notes. You can click on there, or you can send us an email and we'll let you have that. They're all there. You don't have to do them all. Pick the one that resonates well for you. Antoinette, is this the place where we're going to do the Alexander now? Sorry, I forget where we are in our schedule.
I'd love to just add there that, and the price is very low, by the way, for that Fear Masterclass package. So just go and have a look at it and look at the price.
It's $27 or 450 Rand, so Yeah,
it's really nothing. There's probably thousands and thousands of rands worth of coaching and stuff in there. And that's not just a plug, it's true. Because Loretta and I have taken all our experience from doing the stuff on ourselves, thousands of hours of research, Loretta with many, many patients successfully using the stuff, me on myself. And if I can do it, anyone can.
Too.
You too. Yeah. Oh gosh, I've forgotten what I was going to say now. So I think just to say, yes, nervous system. I was going to add to what you said, is if our nervous systems are not regulated, and I see this evidence in my life all the time, including Saturday, is that when something comes our way, we cannot catch the trigger and create the pause and decide how to react. We just go off pop. So for me, when my nervous system's dysregulated, I'm irritable, actually. It's just part of my nature. And I had a few glasses of wine the night before, so therefore I didn't sleep well, even though I thought so. I hadn't yet done my half an hour static back. I did after somebody irritated me and triggered me, and I just went off pop, and now he's actually blocked me. And I'm not saying he was right, but I was so wrong with the way I went off pop at him. I should have just listened to him. If I had been regulated, I would have listened to him, responded later, or I wouldn't even have taken the call. So it's really important that if you're going to work with anger and fear in particular, any difficult emotions, you got to get to a point, and we'll take you through this more, where you can spot the trigger and go, I'm triggered here. and be able to then decide what to do with it and do it in a safe and appropriate way. Otherwise, you just create a cycle, a loop, as Loretta says, more fighting, more dysregulation. So we have done many tools, but Loretta's going to talk you now through one that Gary Ramsey brought on previous podcasts I did. Well, the episodes are on this podcast. It's a very simple version of Alexander, and it's exceptionally powerful. Hey, Loretta, especially if you do it together with static back.
Absolutely.
And we were going to talk today about how to get this awareness in your body and how to notice it. But I think we should do that next time, Loretta. So maybe just do the static back and then maybe some of the simple anger processing tools you and I've used, which also
100%.
do help regulate your nervous system.
I think that's a great idea. Okay, so this is a very, well, I don't know. I know, I've only known about the Alexander technique theoretically until I did a short workshop with Gary. And this is what he taught us, and I found it invaluable. You can do this when you're sitting in your office chair. The idea is for this to become almost second nature, and then you can just do it. You can do it while you're on a walk. You can do it while you're working. You can do it while you're sitting. You can do it while you're standing. You can do it while you're chopping vegetables in the kitchen. But in the beginning, you got to just practice it a little bit, okay? And so this is a really lovely one that you can combine with a static back exercise, because now you're getting double the bang for your buck, because you've actually got the Alexander, so you've got the spine alignment, and you've got the static back. I just want to say one thing about the spine. The spine in Jin Shin Jitsu, and not just in Jin Shin Jitsu, in many energy medicines, it physically represents the source. It represents our connection to our spirits, souls, and or God. So the spine is the physical embodiment of that connection. If you think about it, your spine ends at your brain stem, and it contains your spinal column, which is part of your brain. It's part of your central nervous system. And your central nervous system is it's the dude that runs everything. Okay, so it is, and it literally is the representation, as it were, of God in your body, if you want to look at it that way. Okay, and this is an interesting, I'm sorry, I know I'm waffling, but this is interesting. I love little facts like this, okay? So the guy who founded chiropractic, I think his name was BJ Palmer, he said the reason why he coined the term subluxation, because he said that the spine was the vehicle through which the light of the nervous system goes to everything. I mean, we know, right? All the nerves come out and go to all the organs. And subluxation means under the light. And when you realign the spine, you allow the light to flow through again. I mean, isn't that beautiful? I'm like, really? I thought chiropractic was about like cracking backs, okay? Well, it can be, but that was the philosophy of it, right? So that it was built on. Okay, so the spine is really important energetically, and when you harmonize the alignment of the spine, you allow all the nerves that come out of your spine to supply the organs the way they're supposed to supply the muscles the way they're supposed to. Your autonomic nervous system gets activated. I mean, honestly, it's a win. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to just talk you through it. So it's really, really simple. So you just start off by either sitting or lying down. This is easier lying down because you can align your spine more effectively when you're lying horizontally. If you find that when you're lying, your chin juts a lot, you can place something small under your head so that it feels as if your back, your neck, is not, you want to not be jutting. You don't need to have it like this, but you just want your chin to be aligned. So for most people, we tend to do this because we sit like this in front of our computer. So it always requires, in my opinion, a little chin tuck. Okay, that's what works for me. So close your eyes and just lie or sit comfortably. You don't have to try and extend your spine. You don't have to suck in your stomach, push out your chest. Just sit comfortably. And now just take your awareness to the base of your skull. And I want you to imagine that the base of your skull becomes infused with light, as if it's lighting up. And so just imagine it lighting up and it's starting to glow. And as it does that, it becomes literally lighter and lighter and lighter. And as it does that, it just lifts off the top vertebra of your spine a little bit. Just imagine that you can move your skull with your mind. And imagine it floating just off that top vertebra. Now take your awareness to your collarbones. And I want you to imagine that you're moving your collarbones with your mind to the sides in such a way. Imagine that the edges of your collarbones penetrate through the flesh of your shoulders and they move to the opposite sides of the room. Now take your awareness to your shoulder blades. And imagine moving your shoulder blades down and out through the sides of your chest. And now take your awareness to your hips and your pelvis. And again, just imagine that your femur, the bones that connect your thighs into your hips, imagine that ball that's in your hip socket just starts moving slightly out of the hip socket, ever so slightly, as if your hips are capable of extending out through the sides of your hips to the opposite sides of the room. And then just breathe gently. And if you need to, just take your awareness back up to the base of your skull and just remind yourself it's floating on the top vertebra. Collarbones extending out through the sides of the shoulders. Shoulder blades moving back and out to the sides, down and out to the sides. And hip bones separating slightly out of the hip socket. And when you're ready, you can just open your eyes and come back into the room. It's as simple as that. It's not more complicated than that. In fact, I took slightly longer with it because I just wanted you to really experience it. So that simple spinal alignment, you can do it while you're doing the Jinshin Jitsu big hug. You can do it while you're doing static back. You can incorporate that into different parts of your day. And when you're doing that, you will be helping to regulate your nervous system. And of course, like any exercise, the more you practice it, the better you're going to become at it.
And don't underestimate its power because it's simple. When Gary first brought it on the podcast, I was like, this is crazy, man. But I really trusted him because Gary Ramsay said he used this to navigate an incurable cancer, which he got through his first cancer. And he said because he'd been practicing this for 12 years. So just don't underestimate the power of these simple tools we're bringing to you. So Loretta, should we?
Yes. So I have to interrupt you for a second. I'm sorry, I'm talking a lot today. Right? But I just want to.
You're not.
I want to remind you that overcomplicating is a strategy of our ego. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because this is mine. It's one of mine. It's one of my tried and tested ego tools to sabotage the living hell out of me is by making it more complicated. I'm always looking for complicated. Simple is never going to work, right? But then if you ask me, what do I want? I go, oh, I just wish my life would just be simple. Well, hello, my life can't possibly be simple if one of my strategies is to always complicate it. Look for the complicated, because the more complicated it is, in terms of a technique, the more time it's going to take, the more limbic friction you're going to have, the less likely you're going to do it. And we are very, very prone to going, 36 breaths while holding your chest. I mean, what is that? Now, Alexander, static back. How is this going to do anything for me? Don't overcomplicate it, guys. It's taken me 54 years to learn that complicating is a strategy of mine. Don't be me.
Sure, it took me even more than that. So yeah, and also if you go into adult child work and stuff, you'll find when children have had a very chaotic upbringing and there was always chaos. So I found that in my life, chaos is such a natural state of being that when things are peaceful, it is actually when you get the most anxious and your nervous system gets the most dysregulated because you're not used to it. So you start creating your own chaos. And one of the reasons, it's all this unconscious limiting belief stuff. That's why we bang on about it all the time. So, and one of those things is like, one amount to it all has to be expensive and complicated and be hard and take a long time. Otherwise it doesn't work.
100%. Okay, so Antoinette, I've lost the thread again. So are we going to speak to, do you want to speak to maybe one or two of the tools? Oh, process the anger, or are we going to leave that for another episode?
Yeah, actually, my feeling is now, because we always plan, but then it goes off intuitively in whatever comes through us. So I think that we've probably covered enough space today, and that next week we start with a process. There's a whole lot of steps in this process, actually, which we kind of coupled together from the holistic psychologist, Dr. Nicole Lapierre, because her stuff's very good. And then we've added all our own stuff in. So I think, the starting point is self-awareness and being able to recognize it in your body. And then there's a whole lot of other steps. So my suggestion is that we leave those first two steps for next week. We cover those.
100%.
And then we go through, maybe even do a whole episode of all different kinds of tools and techniques. But if you're feeling particularly furiously angry right now, because some people know they're angry and they don't know what to do with it, maybe just to mention one or two very simple things you can do straight away is you can find a place, obviously, where there's no people around, and where there's rocks or stones. This was very effective for me. You might have to drive out into nature, I don't know, and just choose a rock that your mother or your husband or whoever you're really furious with, and just pelt it and scream at it. And you have no idea how effective that can be. Even if you live in a flat and you live in a city and you're like, I can never do that, just get in your car and scream blue murder. Just releasing it sometimes. Loretta, I don't know if you want to just add one or two in now for the interim before we go through a whole lot.
So one of the ones that I find really effective, it also involves a bit of screaming, but it's called the silent scream, right? So the sound is a bit muffled. I just want to tell you, I had a patient whose husband used to drive her balmy, and then whenever she came to see me, I'd say to her, so how's it going? And she'd go, oh, you know what I do now? I just go into the bathroom, and then as I flush the loo, I scream. So, that's not a bad one, okay? Because I don't think look, I can scream much louder than the flushing of the loo personally. But the silent scream is a really good one, because remember, when we're really angry, it's a pent-up emotion. So it's really good to move your body through that. So like Antoinette's example is actually throwing the stones or pelting the rock that you're throwing other stones at it, or chucking them into a lake or chucking them into the ocean, or whatever you want to do, right? It's very physical. It helps to actually dissipate some of that adrenaline, because there's a lot of adrenaline, there's a lot of hormone that goes on with the feeling of anger. So the silent scream is one that I learned at a woman's tantric retreat. So what you do is you put your hands over your mouth like this, so you're gonna do this, all right? So obviously, so that you can still breathe. You need to do the standing. I'm not going to demonstrate it because it actually looks a little bit hectic. So you ideally want to be on your own, and you scream into your hands as loud as you can while stomping your feet as if you are 3 years old and having a tantrum. Now, you don't have to do the silent scream. You can just do that if you've got the freedom to do that and the noise isn't an issue. But if the noise is an issue, crank the music up, put your hands over and scream like this. That's the kind of thing you're looking for, right? But not just the scream and the stomping as hard as you can. And you need to do that 2 or 3 times, and that's just going to actually dissipate all that excess nervous energy and help to not only regulate your nervous system, but it's also going to help you to express that anger in a way that's really healthy. It's not going to hurt anyone. It's not going to hurt you. In fact, it's going to make you feel a whole lot better, I think.
And sorry, I'm just going to add a testimonial for this, as well as another tool. So a friend of mine is Michelle McLuhan. If you look her up, she does a lot of astrology and self-help work. But she went to a retreat in Japan, actually, because she's an artist and does process art to help people process emotions through art. Anyway, one of the processes they did on that retreat, it was all about processing deep emotions. And the woman took them through a process of screaming while banging a pillow till it broke open. They did it in a group. Just banging a pillow till even if splits apart, if you've got a cheap pillow and you're not harming anybody, it could be very powerful. But the testimony, which I've never shared with Loretta, is Michelle said at the beginning of that week, there was a woman there in a wheelchair. She had one of these muscular dystrophy or multiple sclerosis. Or do you know, by the end of that week, she stood up and walked out.
Wow.
That's the power of this kind of stuff. It's maybe not a cure-all, but that's a real live story.
No, wow, that's amazing. Yeah. So again, don't underestimate the power of simplicity. And you may find you have a lot of resistance to screaming. That's the other thing. You may not want to do this because it's uncomfortable. All right. So the more uncomfortable it is, I always go with like the more uncomfortable it is, the more likely I'm probably to need it. Because the more resistance I have, the more my ego is going, don't do it. Because if you do this, it might cause transformation, and transformation is unsafe.
But also it feels so out of control when you're screaming, even if you're not hurting anyone. And then it's like, I can't do this. It's like, but honestly, the power that lies in this, and actually I watched a movie, everyone's got Netflix. There's a movie on Netflix currently called Let It Be. And in the beginning, I thought, this is such a dark, miserable movie. It's about a couple who get into such a codependent trap, and she starts being a control freak because he never does the stuff with the kids. So she takes over, and then he just disappears because he feels he's unseen, and he has an affair. And anyway, they decide to divorce, but blah, blah. They end up going away somewhere together with these bratty children who are playing out all the drama. And one day, because they're together for 5 days and they just can't take each other anymore, she just starts screaming at him. But I mean, ugly stuff, like letting it all loose, all the stuff she's hated about him and couldn't stand. And then you can just see this man, and then he's like screams back at her. And I'm like, oh my word, now it's really over between these two. Like they're going to have to part ways on this holiday. But you know what that did? It became the catalyst for such deep healing with those two that they ended up, by the end of the 5 days, talking civilly about their issues, reminding each other why they loved each other in the beginning, and getting back into a deep, loving space. And then the kids started reacting differently. I'm like, how did I get to watch that movie, which speaks to the power of, okay, they lost it badly, and it could have maybe ended badly. One of them might have hit each other, or one of them might have walked away, but somehow they both stood in that space.
Yeah.
And that opened the way for the resolution and the love. So don't underestimate the power of this stuff. But please come back next week, because you need to know how to do this. We've given you some very simple stuff today. Work on regulating your nervous system until next week. So by the time we give you some more deep insight,
you're ready.
In a grounded space, and you're ready for it. Yeah. Thank you, Loretta. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you.
Okay. And take a look at the links, okay, where you'll find the link to the Fear Masterclass. I'll put the name of Dr. Nicole Lapira's podcast and maybe a few other useful things. Thank you for journeying with us. Goodbye.
Bye.